dot offthecorner.net. You're watching the Fact Project here on the DJ Tiger channel. FACT is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African Centered Thought. The goal here on the Fact Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. We have joining us today a brother I've been trying to get a hold of for a while, Brother Senghor Baye. Peace and Black Power, Brother Senghor. Thank you for joining us today, brother.
Yeah, Hotep, Hete Pu, Alafia, Habibi Fomi, to me. And it's great to see y'all and what's happening, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, so I know you're out of UNIA in DC, right? Rescue me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. I've been here in DC all my life, actually, African born here in Banneker City, DC.
Okay.
And I got connected with the UNIA in 1979, 1980. It's been a journey. I've gone through the ranks of the UNIA, studied under people who studied directly with Marcus Garvey. And one of the things that I've learned very importantly is that we have been so out of power. Sometimes when our brothers and sisters get in power, we tend to emulate Yurugu, opposed to going back to our ancient Kemetic tradition, where we have the power spiritually, mentally, physically to do whatever we need to do, as Garvey taught us. So I actually rose to a point, actually was elected in 2008 as the President General and served 2 terms. So, but I learned that we are humble servants to the needs of our people, to the wishes of our ancestors, and tied to the Most High, whichever way you do. Like Malcolm said, and Lumumba, who celebrate 100 years this year, both born in 1925. It's very important for us to study our ancestors and learn. And yeah, they made mistakes. They were like us, but for the most part, they gave their lives for us to move forward. And it's our responsibility, as my good brother Anthony Tony Browder says, to find our cosmic assignments.
Okay, so now when it comes to the knowledge of ourselves, we didn't learn this in school. Most of us didn't learn this at home. So how did you originally come into Black consciousness? What is
that's a real good question, brother, and I love to address that. Well, first of all, I grew up in a family that was basically a nationalist family. Even though they didn't call themselves that, they practiced that. And I was raised by, first of all, I was the youngest in my generation on both sides. So I happen to be blessed to have an elder brother and an elder sister who, actually helped me along, and a cousin. Excuse the dog. But anyway, stop it, Zion. So it's so important, though, for us to recognize that knowledge of self comes with you first recognizing what your mission is. Now, fortunately, I had open heart surgery when I was 14.
Whoa.
So I had a lot of people protecting me, loving me. And even though I came through the streets, just like Malcolm and a lot of our brothers and sisters, I woke up with brothers who came home from the Nam, woke me up and shared things with me. So at a young age, I was eager to learn. And then my stepfather took me to the March on Washington when I was 11 and a half years of age. So I was inspired by hearing people like Martin Luther King and reading. And then when I read Malcolm X's book, the autobiography on Malcolm X, I was sold on the direction I thought we should go in. However, I had no idea the UNIA was alive. When I found that out, I hooked up with brothers and sisters here in the DC area who were striving to bring it back alive here in Washington. And the rest is history. So I learned a lot of my, coming into consciousness with elders who work with Garvey. So I saw myself as a blessed young African in my 20s, because I was able to sit at the feet of a lot of wisdom, a lot of elders who were very wise. And even though I was an eager person for revolution, they kind of quieted me down and said, well, young man, I understand your eagerness, but you need to sit here and learn and listen to this. So I was a vivid reader and a poet. And I wrote a book. Actually, I published a book years ago. And I'll just share it real quick. Because I wrote poetry coming off of the street life and seeing how our brothers and sisters were so self-destructive. I wrote a book. I wrote a lot of poems, and then I formed it in a book called From Vibe to Spirit and Then to Soul. So the way I came into consciousness, being around people like Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, Brother Obadeli with the Republic of New Africa. And I actually met those brothers and actually strived to, emulate their work, and then found the UNIA. So I found my niche. So I just see myself as a very blessed young man coming up, unlike some of us, knuckleheads, in the street life and just running and trying to find your way. I was blessed to find my way into what I call Blacktricity.
Yeah.
That was a poem that I wrote when I kind of came into consciousness about, Africanness. My first daughter, who I had in 1972, I put her in an independent school, Nation House Positive Action Center, and I learned a lot from Baba Ajay. People who don't know Baba Ajay, who's an ancestor, he was one of the founders of the Nation House Positive Action Center, and Hakeem Matabuda out of Chicago was very close to them, and they had a group. And so I learned a lot from a lot of brothers and sisters that are older than me, and they kind of, helped me along the way. So now I see myself as an elder myself, but I'm still a youth advocate. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I was one of the lucky ones, and I see myself as a youth advocate because without the youth and without African women, there is no revolution. And if you study the history, Tony Martin kind of taught me there's no revolutions that ever took place that women and youth did not spark.
That's interesting. And I have his book too, the Course of African Philosophy.
Right. That actually that was written by Marcus Garvey, but
That was Marcus Garvey's book.
Tony Martin was commissioned to publish it by my teacher, Honorable Charles L. James,
Okay.
in the 80s, because we saw Robert Hill was getting ready to publish it because he got his hands on it, and he was going to publish it. So because it was first I took the course before it was a book from President General James, who took the course directly from Marcus Garvey, along with Thomas W. Harvey and some sisters, Sister Isaac. They took the course from Garvey because when Garvey saw what was going on in 1937 and 1938, he strived to rehabilitate the movement. Even though he had been excommunicated, he knew the importance, and he couldn't come in the United States. So in Canada, he started teaching what leadership was all about. And it was originally 42 lessons, but the book is published with 22 lessons. Okay. Garvey didn't want the 20 lessons published. And he asked everybody that took that course directly to not ever publish it. So only 22 lessons were published. Of course, Garvey understood the people that he trained were responsible for teaching the course. So in closing, today we have what is called the Garvey Honor Society, where those of us who took the course from those who took the course from Garvey have trained over 38 people who have passed the course, not just by reading the book. A lot of people are doing that and thinking they passed the course, but actually it's a lot more to it than just the 22 lessons. It's to learn from your experiences and to pass those on. Because like I say, we did make a lot of mistakes, and we don't need to be making the same mistakes going into the movement in the 21st century. So that institution was built. Our international organizer is the head of that, Professor David Horn, who was a tenured professor, and now he's retired, and he's our international organizer, and also the founder of PADU, the Pan-African Diaspora Union, and the 6th Region Diaspora Caucus. So it's not just about the UNIA. The UNIA sees itself as a government that needs to be connected to people like yourself, because we know that our ancestors are with us, and they're coming up in a lot of ways. Just like what you were saying earlier about my good brother Ajay, all of us have something to contribute. Runoko Rashidi, who served as our traveling ambassador, we still see him as that because nobody has traveled to as many places as Runoko Rashidi. And Rashidi came back and brought that information back to us, not only in oral, but in picture form. And so thanks to people like Tony Browder and Paul Coates. I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Coates.
Sure.
Well, Paul Coates and Tony helped continue to address his family and keep people focused on Runoko's work. So it's kind of important that I recognize these ancestors, because if it were not for them, we wouldn't be.
Okay, so you are UNIA ACL. What chapter out of DC are you?
Okay, I'm with the Whitson Banneker Jackson Bay Division 330. but I also serve as acting president of the Harambe Division 369, which is a roving division. Most of the members are in Chicago and different other places, but so I serve as that. But I also serve as the first assistant president general now under the leadership of Baba Akili Nkrumah, who served under me for 8 years as first assistant. Now I'm serving under him as first assistant, because it's not about him and me, or it's about we collectivity. And he was trained by Thomas W. Harvey. I was trained by Charles L. James. And we are doing our best to continue the legacy from the beginning of the UNIA to currently where we are today. So, that's one of the reasons why I share that, because even when I came in the UNIA, I met the Nkrumah family, and I have a great deal of respect. And he's in the brotherhood I spoke about, along with Baba Ajay and Brother Chief Fode, who is our third assistant president general, who's a Garveyite. He's younger than us. He's in his 40s, but he's in Sierra Leone. And he's head of the Commission of Building in Africa, which we call the One Africa Commission. So then we also believe in African women in leadership, and I want to get this in. Dr. Chenzara Kahini, and y'all can Google her. She ain't nothing but the truth. She's second assistant president general, and she's a queen mother of Per Ankh, and she's out of the Virgin Islands, but a very powerful sister. And so that makes up, the major leadership of the President General Akili Nkrumah, myself, first assistant, second assistant, Dr. Chenzara, third assistant, President General Chief Fode Mansoure. And then we have a host of other people on the parent body. So I serve on the parent body and also serve with working divisions. I'm not bragging, but historically, probably over the last 50 years, I'm the person that brought in and created more divisions than anybody. And that's only because of the eagerness of people to carry on the legacy of Garvey.
Okay, so you mentioned 330 and some other associations. Today's talk is called "What are the goals of the current Garvey movement?" What are some of the most recent initiatives that yourself, Division 330, and some of your other associations have been engaged in?
Well, of course, we follow the path of what Marcus Garvey left us, and we are striving to build a strong economic structure. Of course, Garvey, we still way behind what Garvey was able to do, but we're moving in that direction. But more importantly, we have an educational committee, an executive education committee that are working with various divisions to set up subcommittees so that we can educate our brothers and sisters, particularly young brothers and sisters, of how to find themselves. And we talked earlier before we started how important that is, of setting up a ways and means for people to find their cosmic assignments. And we know that Malcolm, Lumumba, Dr. King, Medgar Evers, and let me mention some sisters. There's so many too, but they were young. They were young warriors. They weren't like in their 80s or 60s or 70s. They were young when they came into leadership. And we see that same energy rising, like Thomas Sankara today. He was also a very young man and warrior. And you see Traore is emulating Thomas Sankara's work again today. So we know that our young brothers and sisters who come into consciousness enough to know that things ain't right and that we were the first, everybody comes from us, including Urugu and them. They come from us. We are the first. Scientifically, that's been proven. So yes, the answer is we have great programs around education. We're building a strong economic structure. We also are clear on socialism and creating our own social constructs. We know health and wellness is critical. We work with, I have a spiritual son, Brother Haru Aforai Atta, who has a group called, a business called Herbal Results. And for those people that want to check, he was just in Atlanta yesterday. He'll be in DC again. We're actually reversing cancer, high blood pressure, and diabetes, which is critical because once you come into knowing yourself, if you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to be wealthy. And if you're not wealthy, you're not going to be able to build Africa. And if you're not focused on Africa, you're not the kind of wealthy person we're talking about, because everybody should be focused on building Africa, because Africa is the cradle of civilization. Africa has more resources than any continent on the planet, not just the people, but the gems that are in the earth, and everybody is there taking those resources, and those resources are not being properly used for us. So we say you might not get on a boat or a plane to go back to Africa, but you need to focus on building something on the continent, regardless to where you live.
Okay, so you mentioned economic development. I do want to dial it back a step, though, because we're talking today about the work of the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. For the people that may not be too familiar with the Garvey story, what can you tell us about how Marcus Garvey came to start the UNIA? How did that come about?
Well, Marcus Garvey traveled all around the world. He was blessed as a young man to have all kinds of accessibility to books. He was working with his uncle, and his uncle at a printing company, and so he got to read a lot. But he also traveled a lot as a young man, and saw all around the world everything happening, and our people on the bottom of the rung of everything. The bottom of the rungs of economics, the bottom of the rungs of social services, the bottom of the rung of education, the bottom of the rung of politics, and everything. So he said, well, I need to find out how that can be changed. So he strive to build that. But he was influenced by people like Duis Muhammad Ali, Dr. Love, and so many other brothers who came before him, who nurtured him when he traveled. And so he returned back to Jamaica from the UK and established the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League, which was a different name at that point. You know, it had a couple other names in it. However, him and his first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, with about 12 other people, founded the UNIA in 1914. Fast forward, he traveled to the U.S. after being inspired by Up From Slavery of Booker T. Washington, came to the States in March of 2016. And he got a rude awakening to see Black people doing much better than what they were doing in Jamaica and other places for themselves. So he was inspired. But it also happened during a time when they were hanging us in trees, you know, and just killing us. So anyway, Garvey incubated in New York. He traveled over 38 states. He was able to build a movement very rapidly, real quickly. There were three elements of Black people at that time. You had the communists, you know, Black people who were leaning more towards communism. And then you also had the integrationists. And then you had the Do for Self people. Well, Garvey came out of the Do for Self group, and he happened to organize much better than the others. They were very envious of him. So consequently, that's how the Marcus Garvey Must Go campaign came into place, and how Marcus Garvey was railroaded and trumped up charges and was sent to prison based on an empty envelope. But the fact of the matter is, Garvey was able to establish businesses. He was able to establish laundry mats. He was able to make Black dolls. He was able to do stuff and provide employment for African people at a rapid pace. But he also set up institutions of education. He set up the Black Star Line. And so I'm kind of summarizing. The Black Star Line was designed to address the economic issue of, you know, trade and also transportation of people different places. Of course, that didn't pan out too well, because at that time period, Garvey bought ships, and some of those ships were not necessarily in great order. However, that's how they kind of came at Garvey and took him down after hounding and following him. So the UNIA grew in big numbers. I mean, over 25,000 people came to Madison Square Garden in 1920. That's when the government of the UNIA was established. That's when Marcus Garvey was elected as President General, but he was also elected, and to this day, the only person that became the president of all of Africa. That's very important. Some people don't know that, but that's a fact. And so as things flourished, Garvey continued despite the fact he was under attack. And it was not just Garvey, Amy Joss Garvey and a lot of other people. Amy Joss Garvey was his second wife. She became the executive secretary and a leader in the movement. So he established the Negro World newspaper. That today is the highest circulating Black newspaper ever done worldwide. So the movement grew real fast because people came from all around the world in 1920 to that convention. And things progressed, but things also digressed after Garvey was excommunicated he was actually excommunicated out of the States, but his sentence was commuted after he did 2.5 years on a 5-year term, and he was sent out of the United States. So as that goes, he trained a lot of people, And the UNIA continued to flourish, despite the fact it went in decline of numbers because people went scattered everywhere when they no longer had jobs, when they no longer were able to get paid. You had all kinds of people that turned on the movement because they weren't satisfied with what was going on. So you had attacks from internally, and you had the external attacks by Gay Edgar Hoover, you know. And so as the UNIA grew and went through the years, of course, fast forward, he had two sons, Marcus Garvey Jr., who actually became President General, served 3 terms, and I worked with him as 3rd Assistant President General. He's an ancestor now. And Dr. Julius Garvey in 1933. They were born in 1930 and 1933. Same time as Rastafari grew up, same time as the Nation of Islam grew up, same time as the Hebrew groups grew up. All these groups grew up. And then you had Father Divine and all these different groups. Well, all of those brothers and sisters went in different directions, and many of them were members of the Garvey movement. And so you had the movement kind of spread out, and people went in different directions, but the UNIA continued to move forward. And here we find ourselves now, over 100 and some odd years later, still trying to complete the work of building a United African States, or African United States. Yes. And that's in summary. Of course, I can give people our website. They can go to www.uniaclrc2020.com, and they can get more detailed information, and they can reach out to us. And there's many books. The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey is one we recommend. Race First by Tony Martin. The Course of African Philosophy, Message to the People. Critical books. Yes, that's a critical one. It's plenty of critical books out there that people can read so they understand the story. And now that President Biden pardoned Marcus Garvey, of course, we called for the exoneration a long time ago, and we continue to say he needs to be exonerated because pardon implies guilt. However, Dr. Julius Garvey worked so hard with a lot of people, and Biden pardoned Garvey, so that opened the conversation because Garvey was not guilty, but we want him still exonerated, and we want people to emulate his work, because it's not about Garvey as the individual man, it's about the plan. And that was so important because, like I said, Amy Jocks Garvey was just as powerful.
Yeah, now you mentioned President Joe Biden pardoning Marcus Garvey, and there was a long fight to get that pardon. Tell us the story of that fight to get the pardon for Marcus Garvey.
Well, in 1987, the centennial year of Garvey, we went to Congress and demanded for his exoneration. Tony Martin, Runoko Rashidi, Honorable Charles L. James was President General, Queen Mother Moore, John Henry Clark, Dr. Yosef Benjo Cannon, and I'm only naming a few, but they were there. I was there here where we were pressing, and thanks to Conyers, we were able to address that. They did not exonerate Garvey because they said that they could not exonerate a dead person. However, years later, they turned around and exonerated some Urugus who had been dead. So we found that to be not the truth, but that was where the movement started. But it also goes back to when Calvin Coolidge commuted his sentence. But when we fast forward to 87, that was when this movement really started. Well, that didn't happen. So what happened was, years later, Dr. Julius Garvey started putting pressure on Obama and tried to get Obama to exonerate or pardon. We found out that the executive branch can't exonerate based on so-called U.S. law, but they can pardon. So later on, fast forward up to Biden, he did it after pressure was put on, thanks to people like this young brother right here who wrote this book, The Unjust Trial and Conviction of Marcus Garvey, Brother Justin Hanford, and Paul Coates, who also helped do a book with a lot of different people, authors in it, Justice for Marcus Garvey. And thanks to this one congresswoman with the Black Caucus, who's from Jamaica, who aided and assisted on putting pressure. So they told us what was required. We did everything was required. We petitioned. We got people to do signatures in the petition. And so, shockingly, before Biden left office, because of the Trump regime coming in, he pardoned Marcus Garvey, which was a plus. But at the same token, as I say, pardon implies guilt. And so it is still a move to call for the exoneration. We in the government, of the UNIA RC 2020 called on African people to exonerate Garvey and to emulate his work. So we are glad he was pardoned, but pardon implies guilt, and he was not guilty. And in fact, most of the people who were doing the work wanted to exonerate Garvey, but the last option was to get the president to do an executive order in pardoning Garvey. So that happened. And that's sort of it in a nutshell. But I mentioned these books. You can go to Paul Coates, Black Classic Press, and get a lot of these. In fact, Tanasi Coates, Paul Coates' son, did the forward for this one. And there's a ton of people that got articles in here talking about why Garvey should be exonerated or pardoned. And our brother here, who is one of our only Black representatives at the United Nations, Justin Hafford, who's a professor at Howard University, he laid it all out in the trial and what all that took place. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. We use that as a conversation now. So now people, go ahead.
Yeah, most people know the organization as the UNIA.
Right.
But it's also known as the ACL.
Well, yes.
Yeah,
well,
explain that.
Yeah, well, back in the days when Garvey, before 1920, it was the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And then as he came to the United States, he created UNIA Inc., which is not the government. And by the way, we have control of UNIA Inc. also, because that's a nonprofit corporation that was incorporated by Garvey. Even though some other people took it, we got it back years later in the 80s and got control of it. But it's incorporated in New York and Philadelphia. But the ACL was also a corporation that was established called the ACL, and that was primarily for businesses to come under it. A lot of the businesses that Garvey set up were actually the African Communities League. Well, come in 1920, they brought those two together because there were problems that issued with both of those entities in the 1918. There were big problems that took place in New York, and I won't get all into that, but Garvey lost control of UNIA Inc., and ACL became defunct. But we rekindled UNIA Inc. some years ago and control it now. And we also control the government. The ACL now is a part of it. So you say the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League. We say of 1929, because at that time, before Garvey left the United States, there was big conventions and they revamped the Constitution and did some editing to it. We're working on that now to upgrade it, where we don't change the history, but we add amendments that can be more conducive to the 21st century. So that's really what happened. And so that's when we became the UNIA ACL in 1920, the same year that Garvey was appointed a provincial president of all of Africa and the president general of the UNIA ACL. And of course, he served as president general until his death, 1940. Then James R. Stewart came in. Then after him, William Sherrill. Then after him, Thomas W. Harvey. And then after him, Charles L. James. And then after him, Reginald Maddox. And then after him, Redmond Battle. And then after Redmond Battle, myself. Senghor Baye, and then after Senghor Baye, we moved to another level. And even though I don't serve as the President General today, I'm still an obedient servant and doing what I can to pass on the legacy, the facts and the truth, and to also have people check out Tony Martin's work, because Tony Martin did tremendous work with the new Marcus Garvey Library. He's got many books out that any young people can read. And by the way, cut me off anytime you want, man. I'm Garveyite, I'm long-winded.
That's good. That's good.
Cut me off anytime.
Let me ask you this. You talked about UNIA ACL. Now I know the UNIA owned land in America and abroad. What can you tell us about the land, and do they still own that property?
Well, that's a good question. We own land in Belize. Right now, there's some challenges. We're working with that. That was done by Isaiah Morter back in the day. There was a lot of court battles that took place. But thanks to our former Consul General Farouk Muhammad, we took care of that. We're in the process of working that. In terms of other places, unfortunately, a lot of the properties, the Liberty Halls that were held back in the day that Garvey had when he had lots of people, have gone. A lot of them. There are still a few around in Montreal, Canada. There's one in Philadelphia, and there's remnants of buildings in LA. Those buildings still exist, but they're not under the total control. The one in Canada is, and the one in Philly under Garveyites. But unfortunately, when Garvey was moved on, they confiscated a lot of the records. They took a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of internal battling went on economically, and so a lot of the resources that the UNIA had were taken, including documentation. And when we say we exonerate Garvey, that's if they exonerate Garvey, we would have just reason to get all that stuff back, or at least to get some of it back, because even when Garvey strived to take the UNIA to Liberia, a lot of resources and equipment was sent to Liberia we never got. So a lot of things were taken away. And unfortunately, because of the crabs in the barrel mentality of Black people, when they saw Garvey was no longer here, things went all kinds of directions. That's why the rehabilitating committee we had today, Garvey was striving to rehabilitate the movement. So we've gone into all kinds of lumps and bumps throughout history. And we are doing our best so that our young people going forward don't have to go through that same kind of stuff, and then they can move forward and use the UNIA, because technically speaking, we need a government for all of Africa. Now, that does not mean everybody got to be a member of the UNIA, but everybody doing something positive to uplift Black people need to be at the table. And there are works going on with groups like the Pan-African Federalist Movement, which is another group called the PAFM. You can Google that and find out how to get to their websites, both the international website, as well as I work with the International Secretariat with that. But they Garveyites. And we got a method called a Mahat Agreement, where we strive to not only work with Garveyites, but everybody out there that's doing something positive for Black people. We want a Mahat agreement with them, because we tend to fall into Yarugo's plan where he pits us against one another. We start fighting one another and don't get no work done.
Sure.
We attack characters of each other. And one of the things of Mahat is that we should never air out our dirty laundry in public. We should never try to attack Black people, even though they are opposed to us. Because remember, that's what happened during the days of Garvey. The people who called for the Marcus Garvey Must Go campaign that went to the United States government were Black people.
Sure.
And when they did what they did to Marcus Garvey, they turned and said, oh, that was not right. But they were one of the major reasons the U.S. government came after Garvey, because they saw Garvey as a threat. They were very afraid, because what Garvey was doing was what Patrice Lumumba, Malcolm and all of them, Dr. King and all of them continued to do years later. And all of those people I just named recognized Marcus Garvey and his work, including Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Julius Nyerere. A lot of those ancestors understood the importance of Garvey's work. And to this day, even W.B. Du Bois, who came against Garvey, ended up recognizing Garvey's work and going to Ghana himself.
That's right. Let me jump in on you here. You mentioned the land ownership all over the place. Canada and Liberia, Firestone Tire Company,
right,
stole the land that Marcus Garvey had in Liberia. Tell us that story.
Absolutely. In fact, Firestone actually paid $1 something a year for that, and it was definitely done to stop the Garvey movement from moving in Liberia. Even today, that rubber plantation where they treat our brothers and sisters just like slaves, they work hard. You got all these millions and trillions of dollars that have been made with rubber coming out of Liberia because of that. So yeah, that still is a bad sore eye in the movement coming out of Liberia, because they're still there. Firestone is still there, and even though their lease is up, they're still there, and they still are a problem. Not as severe as the problem was back in the day when they took the land from the UNIA and moved it to Firestone, but that was a plan. And so, to this day, we also like to get people to recognize Sierra Leone, because a lot of people just looked at Liberia, but Sierra Leone, for an example, Freetown was done by African people. And before Garvey, there was Edward Wilmot Blyden. So a lot of history of Africa, we need to get back to. And one of the things I call them nation states, not countries, because we weren't at the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference was a method to slow us down when we were coming back into ourselves and trying to come together. And the Europeans were fighting one another over the resources of Africa, and they set the Berlin Conference up and carved up Africa. So we say one united Africa, but Africa is divided. And you can see what's happening in the Congo today because of killing Patrice Lumumba. Same struggle going on today, fighting. You can see what's going on in the Sahel states. Same struggle that went on with Thomas Sankara. So there is hope, but it's got to be self-determination, and we got to get the Yurugus. I use the word Yurugu because Marimba Ani has taught us well. We got to get them off of the continent. And when I say off the continent, their hands out of controlling the destiny of our brothers and sisters that have been hoodwinked. And of course, independence came to those nation states after Garvey.
That's right. And a lot of them use the red, black, and green too.
But thanks to Kwame Nkrumah, exactly, the red, black, and green shows up in mostly all of the nation states' flags in some form, fashion, or shape. If not all three colors, at least two. Right. So, but Kwame Nkrumah set up what we call the Black Star State of Ghana, nation state of Ghana, and he was on the move, and he even bought the Black Star ship out of Baltimore there. So I'm saying he strived to do it, but you see what they did to Kwame Nkrumah when you had the Casablanca group versus the Monrovia group. So, and that's why we are today. And, of course, the African Union now is called the African Union, but it was the Organization for African Unity. And of course, Malcolm emulated that. So there have been upswings in the movement, but they've always used the same divide and conquer tactics to take us down, have us fight one another while they take the resources of the land.
Definitely. Now, let me say this. There are some people in the chat that are really enjoying the conversation. So we want to thank them. Henry Cedillo, Michelle Stewart Tucson, and who else do we have here? Ramir Seven Heavens. They're in the chat. They really like the conversation. You mentioned the Sahel region of Africa. I want to touch on that because you invited me Friday to the Freedom Friday, and this was the discussion. What can you explain to us about what's going on in the Sahel region of Africa right now?
Well, yes, Friday we had a brother from Niger, Abubakar, and then we had Chief Fode, Third Assistant President General on the ground in West Africa and Sierra Leone. And then we had our President General, and then we also had our international organizer, Professor David Horn and Akili, talk about what people need to know, because people have been programmed and misdirected with propaganda of what's going on. Actually, the Sahel states, starting with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, have moved to eradicate not only the French, but all kinds of Yurugus from their country and taking control. So they are the current day revolution of bringing Africa back to what Sheikh Anta Diop told us we needed to do, to federate. Sheikh Anta Diop told us very importantly that we need to federate Africa, meaning the nation states need to come into one conglomeration and work together, opposed to what the Berlin Conference put in place. And so it's important to recognize Traore is an excellent leader, but he's not the only leader. And we're being led to believe that everything based around him. So they're doing everything they can to try to move on him. And it's been all kinds of over 18 different assassination attempts. But what we like about Traore is he's carrying on the legacy as a humble servant like Thomas Sankara did. And he's building rapidly. And it's and they're moving very fast. And so they have ignited young people all over the continent and all over the world. And what we want young people here in the West to understand is this is the kind of direction we need to go in to really be self-determined and to control our own destiny. And we don't need them. Yes, he gets resources from Russia, but let's be very clear that Russia, and I understand what Dr. Clark say, no Yurugus are our friends. But the reality is we don't believe in the frying pan or the fire. However, Russia has never moved on the continent in the same way as other Yurugus have, and they've been supportive of our right to be independent. So consequently, they're getting resources from Russia, weapons, etc., and they have eradicated all of the French. They're changing street names from the names, imagine in Africa, you go down the road and you see a name, a French name. So they're taking those names down. They're moving on goal. They actually got programs for prisoners in Burkina Faso where they can come out of prison and start addressing agriculture and rehabilitating themselves. So there's a tremendous amount of great things going on that really need to be going on around the world. Because when we see what's going on here in the United States of America, we should recognize that it's one bird. You got a right wing and a left wing, the reptilians and the Democrats, or the Democrats and the Republicans. Neither one of them are our friends. Neither one of them are going to free us. And you can look at what happened through different presidencies. When the Democrats were in power, certain things happened. During the Democratic regime, even Barack Obama, they took out Muammar Gaddafi. So what we need to understand is that neither side is our friends. So while this battle is going on, we need to rise up self-determination and claim ourselves. And yeah, we had the Wall Streets that they took down, but we got to go back to that. Wherever we live, we need to consolidate and control our own communities. Because for one, they came before Columbus. Okay? Y'all understand what I'm saying? When I say they, I'm talking about us. We were here even before the transatlantic slave trade. So we need to recognize that wherever we are as Africans, we have every right to it. But without Africa, we don't have the power that we need. The economic power, we need military power. We need one military. We don't need visas. We need to be able to travel all over the place. And we need to be supportive with Africans outside of Africa also being a part of Africa, because actually that's what our root is. And so regardless to where we are, we need to control our own destiny. There's great things happening in the Caribbean of unification. Of course, those are Black nation states there, but here in the United States, that's why we are working to enjoin with what we call a Mahat agreement with the PGRNA, because brothers and Africans have a right to remain here, but they still need to be connected to Africa, as everybody around the world has their foot in Africa. And so what we need to do is understand that we need to control Africa, and wherever we are, Africa needs to support us.
Okay,
And
now
so,
let me say this. You mentioned Russia, and I, for one, do not put the Urugu or the 1/10 in categories. You also mentioned Runoko Rashidi a while back. Runoko Rashidi said Russia was one of the most racist places he had ever been to. So
right.
if Russia is giving you something with one hand, they might be trying to take something back with the other hand.
Well, that's correct, but that's on our brothers to do that negotiation and to make this sure that does not happen. And you're absolutely correct. But look at China. So, but also Pushkin, we have to look at the history. African people, Pushkin came out of Russia too. And I know Runoko was high on that. And Runoko is my brother, and we've had many conversations. But the reality is that whenever you see the wars that are going on between the Urugus, whichever one of them win, they're not going to necessarily be our true friend. But at the same token, it's a reality that, let's look at Cuba, for an example. Castro, Che Guevara. A lot of people tried to make Che Guevara the giant, but Castro was the person. You follow me? So what I'm saying to you is that whatever we need in Africa, we have every right to negotiate with whoever we want. But that does not mean we relinquish rights of self-determination. And that's not what's happening in the Sahel states. Now, you're right in terms of the final analysis, but they're gonna fight. Uruguay's always gonna fight. They're gonna rumble with themselves. They're gonna rumble with us. They are violent people, period. But we have to be able to defend ourselves against that. Now, the fact of the matter is Russia has not moved to neo-colonialize or colonialize Africa like all the other Urugus have, okay? That's a fact. That does not mean that we don't watch them or be careful what we relinquish to them. So I don't want to make the call that they're making, but I will say as a Garveyite, when we get a united African states, we're going to be very clear that nobody is our friends.
You mentioned the Sahel region and the Pan-Africanism that's going on in that area, possibly inspired by the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. But now you have also in Sudan a civil war going on between two factions that came together to overthrow the government.
Right.
Now they're fighting each other. What can you explain to us about that?
Well, that's the same game that the Urugu plays everywhere. You know, they create a situation where they'll fund both sides, or they'll make one side look like the other side needs to be removed for them to be in power, and they have us fight one another. That's historically, that's been the big problem all the time, everywhere. Like what's going on in the Congo right now. I mean, you have the battle that's going on with Rwanda, the leader of Rwanda, pushing in on the Congo for various reasons, the Tutsis and the Hutus thing. And then you have now the head of the DRC, you know, working with Donald Trump, and they making a move to give up all the jewels for protection. But guess what? The enemy created both of those oppressive sides. So what I'm saying is they create a divisiveness amongst us, have us fighting against one another while they come and take all the goods. And that's a historical fact. Even in the United States, we see the same kind of thing. They have various different so-called integrationists fighting down us as nationalists. If you go back to Gary, Indiana, when they had the big conference there before the Black Caucus came into existence, there were nationalists there just like integrationists, and everybody was there. But what came out of that was the Black Caucus. And if you look at what the Black Caucus has done for us today, they're not building no nationhood for Black people. They get paid, and they don't even help their own when they get going to attack, because they're getting paid. And let's don't forget Zionism, you know, because that plays a big role in, if it were not for America, Zionists would not exist, and they are land grabbing thieves. So what they do is keep us in fighting one another, and then they move on us. And if you can look at some of the nation states on the continent, instead of them being emulated and following what's been going on with the Sahel states, they still are going backwards and allowing Urugu to continue to control them, and there's a mess. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Divide and conquer. That's what they've done all along.
Absolutely. Michelle Stewart Tucson in the chat says she's been teaching the children about the Garvey movement. I would tell her to play this video for the children. It'd be a great lesson for them. Now, Brother Senghor, you wrote a book a while back. What can you tell us about the book before we
Well, I wrote a book, The Garveyites Whirlwind Journey, A Garveyites Whirlwind Journey from 1980 to 2016. So I was basically talking about my journey, good, bad, and indifference, meaning I spoke a lot about the ancestors who've gone before us. I spoke a lot about what I've learned. I spoke about a lot of my travels, traveled to the UK twice to the Alkebulan revivalist movement, found Garveyism there. They've been holding it up. Now they are a division with RC 2020, and Brother Shakara, who does a great radio show, Kumunga, which basically he's an ambassador for us. His father is a High Commissioner General, and the reason I say that is because that was one of the highlights of my journey to the UK for the first time, is hooking up with Garveyites who were doing the work through the Alkebulan revivalist movement, but weren't connected to the government. And so now they are. They're the Mosiah division. But I also talk about my travels, different other places around the world in my book. But I also talk about the struggles of leadership and the battles that went on with us. I talk about, come into the book, talking about the Our Own History Club, which is how we brought the UNIA back into Washington, D.C. from back in the days when it had several divisions back under Garvey. I talk about the importance of consolidating energy with independent schools, people like Hannibal Afrique, and people like that with CB, which is still going on today. I talk about hooking up with Ujima Shule. I talk about all the different things we did to bring Garveyism back here. I talk about my trip to Senegal, where I was blown away when I first went to Senegal, and we saw that there was a Marcus Garvey school in the desert that was built by Julius Garvey and my brother out of New York. Names.
Raymond Duguay?
No. This is a elder giant historian, F.A.C.T. And so, and we had a elder named Reverend Saunders who served as an ambassador, and the ambassador opened our eyes to a Martin Luther King clinic and a Garvey school. I talk about that in here. I also talk about my travels to Belize, many travels to Belize and reclaiming the land that we have there. I talk about the trials and the struggles with battling brothers and sisters who came against each other. I talk about people who trained me. So it's pretty much a book from my perspective of how I experienced what was going on spiritually in the movement, politically, economically, and how enjoined we were and the capabilities that we have. Because there's nothing that we cannot do. We settle for projects when we build pyramids. And when I say we built pyramids, we built pyramids. And that means we need to understand that, go inside ourselves, because as my brother Tony Browder says, we got to be memory recovery experts, not just historians. We got to go back inside ourselves and recover the spirit and the DNA of our ancestors and bring that back up, because there's nothing we can't do. And in these times, some people think, oh, we can't do it. Oh, we can. Hey, we built America. We built this place, man. So it's nothing that we can't do. The issue is knowing yourself, knowing your ability, not being afraid, loving your brother and sister. And when you disagree, do not become disagreeable and attack your brother and sister. Change that energy, walk away. I was taught, if you can't hammer it out on the anvil of reason, walk away from it. Don't go to war with your brother and sister. That's the issue.
Yeah, you mentioned knowing yourself. And so I do something called a daily knowledge of self. And every day of the month is a different theme, a different concept. Today's knowledge of self is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is defined as able to supply one's own needs without external help. Self-sufficiency is the ability to function independently without aid or support from the larger society. It is the capability of a group to be self-dependent and self-reliant. The solution to the problems faced by African people comes when we begin to restore our lost self-sufficiency. In an effort to be self-sufficient, we must have control of our most basic human survival needs: our food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and self-defense. To be a free and self-sustaining people, we must be self-sufficient. Freedom is a byproduct of self-sufficiency, meaning we must first have a measurable degree of self-sufficiency to have a semblance of freedom. Now, was this theme of self-sufficiency, was that a central theme in the Garvey movement?
Absolutely. Okay. And you excuse me, you hit the nail on the head, brother. If you can't supply food, clothing, and shelter and security, you ain't a nation. Those are pillars with building nation states. And you got to be able to feed yourself. You got to be able to build for your own self. You got to be able to protect what you have. And those are key elements. And that's why I use ancient Kemet, because we did it all, brother, before Urugu even was in existence.
That's right.
We built it all, and we can get back to that. And if you see what's going on right now, London Bridge is tumbling down. Babylon is falling. So, but we don't need those bricks to fall on us. We need to come from out of that and do what you just said in terms of being self-reliant, self-determined, and do what we can do. Garvey said we needed to be science par excellence. Everything there. If you look at the different things we created that they stole from us, we've actually. They didn't even know the world was round, bro. Right. Even though they came from us, they didn't understand anything about us, and they took advantage of our loving nature and captivated us. And that's where we get the transatlantic slave trade and the Arab slave trade. I don't want to leave that one out either, because that's serious too. And they all saw the resources in Africa as being critical. You and I would not be talking right now if it were not for resources from the Congo.
That's
so
true.
The reality is we need to control those resources and not allow others to control them and to control so-called demonocracy. And I want to be clear, their democracy is demonocracy. We need to be democratic, but for real democratic, and not fall into their democracy or demonocracy, because that's what happens. And they want to dictate how we should be living, how we should move forward. So self-reliance is critical. Self-determination goes with that. And restitution and repair for reparations is critical, not just externally, We need to internally repair ourselves with the resources that we have. Your dollars here in North America go much further in Africa.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you this. We mentioned the concept of self-sufficient control of your food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and your self-defense. You must be able to defend your self-sufficient control of your food, clothes, shelter, etc. Marcus Garvey had the Black Legion. This is something that's not really talked about. In the last couple minutes we have left, explain to us what the Black Legion was in the Garvey movement.
Well, first you had the Deacons of Defense. You know, the Deacons of Defense and the Legionnaires, all of that's important. The reason I say that is because it fast forwards to the Panther Party. All of that is the same nature. The Legionnaires was established as a military wing of the government of the UNIA. Of course, we need one single military in Africa now, particularly, and we also need to have a right to self-determination and defense for ourselves. So the Legionnaires was set up that way, and also along with that came the Black Cross nurses and the motor corps. So the sisters had a role too. And it's so important for us to recognize that out of that, the Deacons of Defense, and you can Google and find the history out, the Black Panther Party, all of those were continuations. I had an opportunity of meeting Brother Geronimo G. Jaja Pratt, and he was inspired by the Deacons of Defense, and he felt he was a Garveyite, even though he worked with the Black Panther Party and was railroaded, if you hear what I'm saying. So we need to reconnect. We also need to reconnect with the PGRNA, needs to be connected to the UNIA. All of us need to be connected, and we need to secure ourselves. We need to be able to secure ourselves. And what the UNIA calls for security, later on that needs to fast forward into a form of a military army, one that can protect us everywhere we are. Because if they attack our Africans in North America on Monday, on Tuesday they'll be in South America, and on Wednesday they'll be in Canada, and they'll be coming after all of us. So if any of us are attacked anywhere, it's a detriment to us everywhere.
Absolutely. Now, you invited me on to Freedom Friday. I don't know if that's open to the public. I know you say it's going to go to YouTube, but how can people see Freedom Friday?
Oh, yes, it is. Absolutely. It's open to the public. You can go to the new, what is called the New Black Learning Channel on YouTube, and you can see many of the Freedom Fridays, because we have that division that hosts that site is 369, but we upload all of the Freedom Fridays we do bi-weekly. You can go check them all out there. And then you also can go to the UNIA website, which is UNIA ACL RC2020.com. That will be posted there soon, but we also are building our own, rebuilding our own YouTube page for the UNIA, and they'll be there. So, and those people that are on Facebook can go to the Woodson Banneker Jackson Bay Division 330 Facebook page or my Facebook page, Senghor Baye, and they can see a lot of them there. I recommend people to go to YouTube. And if you want to email me, and I can send you some of those direct links, you can email me at senghorb@hotmail.com or icloud.com.
Okay.
And so please, let's stay in touch, brothers and sisters. I appreciate this hour. I appreciate you too, brother, because without you, there is no movement. Our younger generation is not asleep. They awoke. It's our job, those of us, the so-called baby boomers, to come together, drop our egos, drop out this mom in this group, I'm in that group. If you're in a group doing anything for Black people, you should be a part of Organ I Nations, and you should be providing a collective structure for those that come behind us. So my brother, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you. Your interview was right on point. Brothers and sisters, don't be content with the food of chickens. Our ancestors are waiting and watching. Children crying and dying only because we're still too apathetic to understand why we were created in the first place. We can win. In fact, we won spiritually. We lose physically because we haven't connected to the spirit. One God, one aim, one destiny. Up, you mighty race, we can accomplish what we will.
Yes, and your dog agrees with you.
Who's that now?
I say your dog is agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah. Zion. His name's Zion.
Okay, so last question really quick. How can people get your book?
Oh, they can just email me and I'll send it to them. I'm not selling it on Amazon or anything like that, but I can hook you up right away with it. That's important. Hit me up at senghorb@hotmail.com. You can text me at 202-256-2518. Don't call me because I ain't gonna answer unless I got you in my phone. 202-256-2518. And remember, we are going to win, brothers and sisters. Know yourself. Love yourself. Love your family. Let's build.
Ashe, Ashe. I want to thank everyone that joined us in the chat. They still chiming in, brother Senghor Baye. I want to thank you for joining us, and we got to bring you back again soon, man.
Hey, I'll be more than welcome, brother. Appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing, and just know, bro, all this crazy stuff going on in Babylon is going to happen. They're going to battle one another, but we need to get up from out of it and build our own thing because they're coming after us, whichever one of them win.
Yeah, that's real. That's real talk. So, brother Senghor, we want to thank you again, and we're gonna reach out to you soon. We're gonna bring you back on again soon.
Ashe.
All right, brother. Peace.
Peace.